So much for President Bush's bleating about how the Democrats in Congress just stole the eavesdropping authorities, the tools of counterterrorism, away from the professionals by not sending him his version of the FISA Act. In our third story in the countdown, it's true, said National Director of Intelligence Mike McConnell this morning on NPR radio. Some of the authorities would carry over to the period they were established for 1 year. Okay, one Bush lie confirmed. Remarkably, McConnell continued. However, that's not the real issue, he added. The issue is liability protection for the private sector. There goes the other Bush lie about this, that it's about keeping you safe when, in fact, it's only about keeping the telecom giants safe. Mr. Bush today telling us what will happen as a result when his version of FISA expires tomorrow.
This bill comes to the House of Representatives, and it was blocked. And by blocking this piece of legislation, our country is more endangered of an attack. By not giving the professionals the tools they need, it's going to be a lot harder to do the job we need to be able to defend America. These telephone companies that work collaboratively with us to protect the American people are afraid they're going to get sued. And the American people got to understand these lawsuits make it harder for us to convince people to help protect you.
Well, thanks for finally admitting they collaborated with you. A, you don't have to convince anyone if you have a warrant. B, the U.S. can still wiretap terror suspects Sunday and for the following year. C, Mr. Bush blocked extending FISA past tomorrow, not the House. D, Republicans blocked covering any losses the telecoms might suffer in court. E, it was Mr. Bush who had intel after the bombing of the Cole, but made our country more in danger by failing to act on it when it was revealed that his lack of retaliation had pushed al-Qaeda to plan something bigger than that. And F, it was Mr. Bush who endorsed the Pakistani safe haven where Osama bin Laden and presumably his phone now reside. G, it was Mr. Bush, despite all of this, who today dared to tell British television that the British families of those killed in Britain's subway bombings agree with him.
It should send the signal that America is going to respect law, but is going to take actions necessary to protect ourselves and find information that may protect others. Unless, of course, people say, well, there's no threat. They're just making up the threat. These people aren't problematic. But I don't see how you can say that in Great Britain. After people came and, blew up bombs and subways. I suspect the families of those victims understand the nature of killers.
Now with us now, MSNBC political analyst Rachel Maddow, the host of the Rachel Maddow Show, which of course airs weeknights on Air America Radio. Good to see you again.
Hi, Keith.
I forgot H. Is he not arguing for enforcement tools against an enemy that his war was supposed to have nailed like 6 years ago?
Yeah. And the line is always, if al-Qaeda is calling in the United States, we want to know who they're calling and why. Which sounds great until you think, well, wait a minute, the laws before, the old FISA law, allowed you to wiretap anybody who even suspected was al-Qaeda. There was even this nifty provision where if you couldn't get the paperwork in order ahead of time, you could go ahead and start the wiretap and then 3 days later get the paperwork put into the FISA court. If there's no connection between these expansions of presidential power and this kind of riding roughshod over the restrictions on presidential power in our laws, if there's no connection between those and getting the bad guys, it makes you wonder why it is that they want to expand presidential power this way. Remember, right after 9/11, the Congress offered to loosen the FISA rules. And the Bush Justice Department said, no, we actually think they're fine. Then they proceeded to break those rules, which they had said were not too onerous. They would prefer to do it in a law-breaking way. That should make us say,
Well, and to that point, what do we attribute Mr. McConnell's honesty on the radio this morning where he said the issue is liability protection for the private sector? Was there like oxygen deprivation for this man here that caused him to blurt out the truth like that? Is it just difficult to lie 24 hours a day? Why did he say that if it's so contrary to what his boss is saying?
Well, the liability for the phone companies is the thing that expires. That's the spying powers don't expire. It's just the get-out-of-jail-free card for the phone companies. And let us not forget as well that the phone companies have pulled the plug on government spying on Americans without a warrant at one point since 9/11. They didn't pull the plug on it. They didn't say no because of the privacy laws that we thought protected us. They pulled the plug when the government stopped paying the bills. So if that's the noble cause that they think, earns them them legal immunity for breaking the law, I would like to hear them make that case to the American public and explain the whole pulling the plug when they didn't pay the bills thing.
And, of course, also you're getting protection for everybody in the government who collaborated with the telecoms. It's not just the telecoms that are getting the immunity in those lawsuits.
Well, right. That's the issue about the phone companies. As you noted here, the Congress rejected, the Republicans in Congress rejected the idea that the government would just cover any financial losses that the companies suffered as a result of these lawsuits. Well, if you take that away, then they can't be afraid of anything from these lawsuits except what we would learn from those lawsuits proceeding, which is who they have wiretapped, why they were doing it, and what the procedures were that brought us to this place.
So how are, after all this happened, how are the Democrats sleeping at night?
Yeah. How are they, how will our political processes move forward without fantasies of national security threats that don't exist covering up our corporate welfare? Yeah. How will we sleep? Yeah.
And speaking of sleeping well, I guess Mr. Bush is going to sleep well, even though he told the BBC that way that Brits who lost loved ones in the bombings in London are on his side. Was that a shrewd maneuver or what?
That's unbelievable. As if, really the families of people who have been killed in terrorism really want to make sure that lawsuits don't go forward against telecom companies that cover up what governments have done to their citizens in the name of national security that has nothing to do with making us any safer from the next terrorist attack. I'm sure that's how they feel.
Right. And also the family of Mr. Menezes, the electrician who was supposedly a terrorist, except now it turned out just to be an electrician who looked kind of like one who lived in the neighborhood.
I'm sure he agrees.
Yeah, I'm sure they agree too. Rachel Maddow of Air America and MSNBC. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, Keith.